Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's HR Advice webinar, the do's and don'ts for a successful Christmas party season. My name's Alice, and I'm going to be one of your hosts and presenters for today, and I'm also joined by some very special guests from Advisor Plus, who we'll be introducing to you very shortly. So my name's Alice, I work here at Sage in Newcastle and I'm a learning facilitator specialising in webinars. So you might have seen me if you've attended any of the Sage 50 payroll webinars recently, or if you've joined any of our previous Advisor Plus sessions too. But I'm joined today by Advisor Plus HR Technical Consultant Sarah and Team Coach and Senior HR Advisor Denise as well, and they're both here to share their expertise on preparing for the festive season to make sure that your upcoming parties and social events and things are still fun, but still compliant and safe too. So we will be covering kind of setting clear expectations for behaviour and professionalism, inclusive celebration strategies, dealing with unexpected absences over the festive period, and your legal responsibilities as an employer. But first, let's meet our other hosts. So Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Great, thanks Alice. So my name's Sarah and I'm a technical HR consultant. I've worked in HR for the last 10 years, prior to which I worked as a solicitor dealing with litigation and employment disputes. I've worked within several sectors, including healthcare, insurance, retail, banking and facilities management. My role at Advisor Plus involves supporting the advisory team with complex and high-risk cases and also focusing on upskilling and training. And I'll pass over to my colleague Denise.
Fab, thanks Sarah. Hi, my name's Denise. I've worked in HR for 10 years. I'm a team coach and a senior advisor at AP, supporting a team of advisors to provide a HR service to the Sage client. I've experienced dealing with various different cases and HR topics such as performance, capability, grievance, high-risk disciplinary cases and flexible working. And I support a team and the advice line to help provide guidance to managers dealing with their HR issues within their business.
Fab, thank you both so much. And yeah, just to let you know as well, after the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email, and that's going to include a recording, so you can rewatch the session as many times as you need to. So that will include everything that we speak about today, including some kind of general do's and don'ts and links to the portal of the policies and kind of areas that you do need to pay particular attention to. So in this session, we are going to give you some real-life HR scenarios that Sarah and Denise have come up with in their careers and provide some proactive ideas to support your business as well, and as well as addressing how to handle situations where something might have gone wrong. So we'll get started, and without further ado, it's over to you, Denise.
Thanks, Alice. Okay, so first up, we should probably cover what we can do proactively to make sure that all colleagues are having fun at any Christmas or festive social events. This helps to reduce any risk of having to deal with any grievances or disciplinary when you come back into work on the Monday morning. So it's easy for colleagues to assume that because they're off-site, because you're at a party, because people may be consuming alcohol, including managers, that this means that the conduct rules don't apply anymore. And almost what happens at the party stays at the party. That couldn't be further from the truth, really. Whilst obviously there'll be some behaviour allowed at the party that wouldn't normally happen in the normal working hours or situations, for example, consuming alcohol, this doesn't mean that any type of conduct is acceptable. So a workplace party or event is an extension of the workplace, and therefore it pays to be upfront and super clear with colleagues about the expectations when they go to these types of parties. So this can be done by either sending an all staff email, or if your business is smaller, you could handle it a few days before the event by doing a huddle or something like that to make sure everybody understands the expectations. So this doesn't have to put a dampener on the party, but at the end of the day, it's important that colleagues understand the rules so that everyone can feel safe, comfortable and included at the party. So let's consider some basic rules that you may want to cover in your communications. So first of all, those in a position of management should not behave in a way that undermines their position, while still being allowed to be relaxed and informal at the party. Some of the things you might want to consider are employees should not say or do anything that could offend or intimidate, embarrass or upset others, whether they feel that they're joking or not. Swearing in inappropriate language is also not acceptable. Employees should not act in a way that they could bring the company's name into disrepute as they're representing the company at the event. Illegal drugs should not be taken at any work event, regardless of whether it's on company property or not. and employees should be sensible about their alcohol consumption, irrespective of whether the company is paying for the drinks. And finally, something else to consider are if employees plan to drive, they should not exceed the alcohol limit and drink and drive following either to the social event or following the social event. So as an employer, with the work party being an extension of the workplace, the same duty of care and responsibilities are still expected for you and your employees to do what makes people feel safe and also inform them of the rules and regulations before the party. This also helps everybody feel protective at the party as well. Okay,
thanks for all of that, Denise. Thanks. Yeah, they're really important points, all of those. And I think to pick up on what you just said about the employee's duty of care and responsibilities, this is even more important since the new sexual harassment legislation came into place on the 26th of October. Hopefully you were aware from our previous webinars, but if not, the Worker Protection Act 2023 was introduced in the UK in October. And that requires employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. Bearing in mind what we've already said about the party being an extension of the workplace, it's really important that you can demonstrate that you took reasonable steps to prevent anything like this happening. This could include something like Denise has already suggested, where you are clear before the party happens about what is acceptable and what is not.
Have you ever had any cases during or after the December period then where colleagues have fallen foul of not realising that these rules extend to the festive parties?
Oh, absolutely. And this combines a range of different behaviours that you see from colleagues as well. One example is a case where I had a manager who used a racial slur towards an employee on the Christmas night out, which eventually led to a physical altercation between the two as well. Witness statements made it clear that the manager in question did use the slur and continued to pursue and goad the other colleague until the physical altercation occurred. And they also confirmed that alcohol had been consumed by both participants. There's a couple of things to pick up on in this type of situation, and just to be clear, both of the individuals in this situation were disciplined, but in this webinar we'll focus on the manager's behaviour. So firstly, the manager at the party was the most senior attendee at the time of the incident. That's not to say that management can't go out and have a good time. Be a bit more relaxed than they normally would be, and we want everyone to have the chance to celebrate. But as a manager, you do need to be conscious of your standing and your responsibility, and that this extends to workplace events as well. You are ultimately a role model within the business. Not only is it that you are bound by the rules that Denise has already discussed, but you need to think about how your team will be looking at you on Monday morning if you really undermine yourself and lost respect because of that behaviour. Secondly, using a racial slur is clearly not okay in any circumstance, but the excuse of alcohol being involved is not going to be good enough mitigation to explain that behaviour. And I think this is what a lot of businesses fall foul of as well. Another case that comes to mind is one where there was a female colleague who had been sexually harassed on a Christmas night out by one of the male managers. This involved inappropriate comments and suggestions along with unwanted physical contact. When the female colleague reported it once they were back in work, the business felt it could be resolved informally and asked the colleague and manager to basically go in a room and sort out their differences. Once the case reached us and we asked why they thought it was informal, the management said they did not feel it was fair to discipline the manager when they'd been having fun and were under the influence of alcohol. It's really important that businesses understand that alcohol being involved, or it being a relaxed party or off company property, doesn't make these types of behaviour any less acceptable, and it really should be dealt with in the same way as if that behaviour had happened during work hours. The risk in this situation, had we not intervened, would have been a potential constructive dismissal claim from that colleague, which would have included sex discrimination. And also, if we think back to the new legislation, if that incident had happened after the 26th of October, an employment tribunal award could potentially be uplifted by an extra 25% if the company were unable to demonstrate that they had taken reasonable steps to avoid that harassment from happening.
Yeah, some really, really interesting cases there. Thank you. And I think a lot of the time you do get the reasoning of, well, that was so out of character for them. They would never have done that if they were sober. And actually, it's not a good enough answer. The damage has already been done, and another colleague has been offended or upset by the behaviour. So they've still done what they did, and alcohol's just not a good enough excuse.
100%, and it's not just the parties that you need to watch out for. So Secret Santa and gift swapping in the workplace can also be another source of conflict. I've had a number of cases where someone's been offended by a gift that's been given. Sometimes this is something with offensive language on that's been given in jest, but it's not really gone down very well, or someone tries to give something sarcastic and it backfires. So the festive season can bring out the joker in people, especially where spirits are high. But it's important again to remember that it's in the workplace and to consider how other colleagues might feel receiving these gifts, as it might kind of cause them offence or real embarrassment. So it's best to keep these types of presents for outside the workplace, for your friends who you know and they're happy and they're going to accept the joke. Even if you're best friends with somebody in work, please bear in mind that someone might be offended by the present if it has something like inappropriate language on it. So again, it's probably best to give those presents at another time or maybe outside of work.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's been quite a recent topical case that has gone through the Employment Appeal Tribunal recently, which was Finn and British Bun Company, in which they found that calling a man bald is sex-related harassment. Mr. Finn was referred to as bald alongside another very bad word, which I won't repeat here, but starts with a C. The Employment Tribunal and the appeal found that the use of the word bald was therefore meant as a derogatory term intended to violate Mr. Finn's dignity and to create a humiliating environment for him. They also found that it was specifically in relation to Mr. Finn's appearance, and whilst all genders could possibly be bald, it is something that appears much more frequently in men and was therefore classed as a type of sex discrimination. It goes to show that comments about people's appearance could potentially be very serious. And so any Secret Santa presents that could touch on these ideas, such as ball caps or Christmas cards or stationery and mugs that refer to being bald, could actually be considered sex discrimination. It also brings to mind another case that we had where someone thought it was appropriate to give red lingerie as a Secret Santa present to someone that they barely knew. I'm not sure whether that colleague intended it as a joke or anything else, but ultimately, this could be considered sexual harassment. Remember that behaviour that offends, intimidates, upsets, or embarrasses a person is not acceptable. Much to Denise's point, even if that colleague had taken the present well, which they did not, someone else could have felt very uncomfortable by it. It's not workplace appropriate to be bringing someone like that as a present. So again, if you are doing a Secret Santa or gift giving in your business, whilst you are putting rules on how much you're allowed to spend on one another, perhaps also take the opportunity to remind people that the present should be safe for work and appropriate as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, a lot to consider there. I think the message is really, if in doubt, just don't buy it or don't do it, and just go for something simple instead. It's great to know, how to set out these expectations over the festive period, because as you've said, spirits are high, fun's been had, but it is important to remember that it's a workplace and to remain appropriate. I suppose the next thing really to move on to is how the festive period can impact on a colleague's absence, and how the business can handle this as well. Have you got any thoughts on this, Denise?
Yeah, so this is quite a common question that comes up around the festive period. So in particular, businesses sometimes see increased amounts of sickness, absence during this time. This can be related to the colds and bugs that we know go around at this time during the year. But also, if you did want to be a little bit cynical, there will be colleagues calling in the day after a work party, or even on Boxing Day or New Year's Day. This can be really frustrating though for managers and for other colleagues, especially where we've planned on the rota to try and let people have time off, and then people call in sick and it becomes more difficult to balance the workload across all the colleagues that are working on that day. But you do have to be careful about the approach you take and when. So if a colleague does call in sick, you should first try and establish why the colleague is unwell, how long they're expected to be absent for. Unless you have a real reason to doubt the reasons given, you should consider their sickness as genuine and review the colleague's absence record and whether they've possibly hit an attendance trigger for unsatisfactory attendance, and continue to follow your processes to manage the issue and possibly a warning if appropriate. So if you do have reason to believe the absence is not genuine, you could then have a look to follow the conduct route rather than the absence route, but you can't follow both processes to deal with the actual absence itself. So although what you could do is you could follow the attendance process for the absence and the conduct process for the failure to follow the absence reporting procedure, for example. So you would need some evidence to support that you felt the absence wasn't genuine. So it can't really just be based on suspicion. So things you could have a little think about are, is there a social media post that suggests that the colleague is not unwell? Is it that you've seen some posts whereby they're pictured in the pub on Boxing Day when they've called in sick, for example? If this is the case, you could then conduct an investigation into what could be classed as unauthorised absence rather than a sickness, and also potentially into the dishonesty of the colleague if they've not been totally truthful about their absence on that day.
These are really good points, Denise. The absence should be treated as one or the other. Either it's a sickness and it's dealt with via the absence management process, or it's an authorised absence and you can follow the disciplinary route. It's important not to jump to conclusions though, as sometimes it can be something completely different, and we want to make sure that we are supporting colleagues at the same time. I once had a case on Christmas Eve years ago where an employee had called in to say they couldn't come into work, but were really cagey about the reasons why. I advised the manager to go back and try and get some more detail from the colleague to understand what was going on without jumping to the conclusion that they were just trying to get Christmas Eve off. It actually turned out that the colleague was having a really difficult time at home. Her husband thought she was having an affair with one of her other colleagues in the workplace and had told her that if she went to work instead of spending Christmas Eve with him, that he would start divorce proceedings. It wasn't the most festive of cases to deal with on Christmas Eve, but it was a really difficult situation because what type of leave do you put down for that? Do you insist that the colleague needs to come to work because their personal issues are not our concern? We decided to take a more supportive approach, as they were very upset on the phone, and we let them take that day off as unpaid leave, but did explain that we would need to discuss next steps after Christmas, as the colleague could not avoid work forever. There will be other situations that come up as well. That could be childcare falling through because children are sent home from nursery or school ill because of the bugs that go around, or it could be having to go to a dependent who has fallen on ice, or issues such as pipes freezing and boilers going off in the cold weather. For any emergency time off for dependents, remember that employees have a statutory right to unpaid time off to deal with unexpected situations relating to a dependent. For any home-related issues, again, businesses should be reasonable in allowing colleagues to have time off to resolve important emergency situation. If there's an option for, say, working from home as well, you can consider this. Whilst there might be some distractions for the employee if they have children at home or tradespeople coming in and out, it may still be a better option than having the colleague out of work completely.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it does get really busy with all of these queries, I imagine, over the festive period too. Is there anything else that you can think to cover off that's kind of a key part of the festive period in this webinar?
Yeah, I think another really important thing for businesses to consider is making sure that the festive period is inclusive for all, bearing in mind that Christmas is first and foremost a Christian religious holiday.
Yeah, that is a really good point. There will be those that celebrate different religious holidays, of course, as well as recognising that Christmas is a religious celebration. But also it's kind of celebrated by people who are not religious, who see it more as a time for family, for example.
Yeah, it's something really important to consider. So part of my role managing some of the other advisory colleagues, I have direct reports from all different backgrounds and religions, and it's vital that all colleagues feel that they're included and recognised during this time. So there are a few bits that businesses really want to pay attention to. So firstly, if your business is handing out presents as part of the festive period, consider what might be inclusive. So for example, gifts of a bottle of wine, for example, will not be inclusive to those who don't drink, either for religious reasons or just for personal reasons. Also, an option of giving out a food item can be difficult again, as people have dietary restrictions, either due to religious reasons, allergies, intolerances, or even just a choice of diet such as being vegetarian or vegan. It's best to give out a generic voucher, something that you could maybe think about to allow colleagues to pick up and choose their own present that will suit them. So next, if you've not done so already, you should make sure there is equal focus across all religious holidays all round the year to make everyone feel included. So Christmas can also almost be a default holiday, but it's important to remember that some colleagues may observe other religious events as well, such as Ramadan or Hanukkah, just to name a couple. So this is a good time to reflect on how you've previously acknowledged and celebrated other religious holidays and whether you could improve on this moving forward. So regardless of religion, some people choose to celebrate Christmas as a cultural holiday, regardless of their own faith. You should make sure all colleagues are invited to the Christmas activities and not exclude anyone on assumption. What about you, Sarah? Have you got any other ideas on that at all?
Yeah, I think I've got a couple. So other things that might be important to consider, for example, are kind of that workplace event and where it's being held and when. For example, does it clash with another religious holiday, which will lead to some colleagues being unable to attend? Is the venue accessible for those with disabilities, both physical and otherwise? Does the menu at that venue cater to different dietary requirements? You should also consider if you've got any remote workers that will be unable to attend the event or the office due to their location, and how you might want to be able to include them as well. You might want to consider if there's any travel or accommodation options that you can offer, or how you could include them in other Christmas activities via Teams or Zoom, doing things such as Christmas quizzes or online games to make sure that they're also involved within there. Lastly, when you're wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, you might also want to look at including something along the lines of Happy Holidays or Happy Festive Period. This doesn't need to replace Merry Christmas, as it's important to recognise this as a religious holiday that it is. But it can be nice to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays on all your staff emails or cards or presents to again recognise and include everyone.
Definitely, I think it's super important to make sure everyone is included in this as well. It feels like we could talk about HR during the festive period for the rest of the week, to be honest. I bet there's loads of other cases and stories that you've got. But are there any other top tips that we haven't covered that you would like to briefly touch on?
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, Alice. I'm sure that most HR professionals and managers would have at least one story to tell about something that they've dealt with or had to witness themselves over this holiday period. I could absolutely talk about it all day, but just a couple more things that we would probably recommend that you focus on. So the weather at this time of year can cause all sorts of difficulties with colleagues getting into work, but also potential workplace injuries. I know that we as a business have already had people snowed in at home a couple of weeks ago. Luckily, they were able to work from home, but had their children with them as nurseries had closed due to the weather. We also had clients where they have people working outdoors, be it in yards or off-site or out on different roads, out in fields, or sometimes just in really hard to get places like the Lake District, for example. So it's a really good time of year to remind all colleagues of what health and safety measures are in place and about keeping themselves safe in icy and cold and windy conditions. You should also make sure that you as a business are ready to fulfill your obligations from a duty of care perspective as an employer. For example, making sure that car parks and walkways are gritted where they are your responsibility, and that the heating is working in the offices or work locations. If you work with customers or clients, it's always nice to receive a box of Quality Street or hamper of goodies as a gift at Christmas. It's important that your colleagues and you, however, know where to draw the line in terms of gifts, and make sure that you don't potentially fall foul of the Bribery Act 2010. Ultimately, gifts should be given to show gratitude and not to try and influence you as a business or your employees to act in a certain way or show any favour towards them, for example, by choosing to renew a contract or offering discounts. If in doubt, seek further legal advice, but be aware of whether you're being asked to do something in return for a gift, or even if the intention is to quote unquote buy your good favour. Denise, have you got anything else to add there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a couple of few bits. So whilst Christmas can be a joyful time for people, it can also bring a lot of stress, upset, loneliness for people as well. It's a time to reflect, and it can be a heightened feelings of grief, no matter how long maybe a loved one has been gone for. It can also bring some financial stresses and pressures. It can be a heightened time of year for family disagreements and conflicts as well. On top of this, the dark and grey weather can affect people's well-being and can trigger seasonal affective disorder in colleagues, can stop people from carrying out activities that they would normally do for their mental health, such as running or walking in nature. Take the time and the opportunity to remind colleagues of what well-being measures you have in place. So whether that's a mental health first aider, an employee assistance programme number that you could hand out, or by letting them know that your door's always open if they need to talk. So productivity can also drop over the festive period, particularly where colleagues are using their work time either on their laptops or phones to finish off last minute Christmas shopping. It might be that they're organising social events with friends and family, or maybe even watching a bit of Home Alone in the background, or listening to a bit of Mariah to get in the festive spirit. So you don't need to necessarily go the whole way and block these sites, but make sure colleagues know what's expected of them. For example, them being permitted to use their laptops for Christmas shopping during their breaks, or having the radio on in the background but not necessarily wearing headphones. It'll depend on your business, the rules about how this works and what you feel is reasonable for you and your colleagues. But the important thing is to make sure the rules are super clear at the start. So if colleagues do then break the rules, it's about reminding them. And then potentially, if it continues, you could follow the informal or formal disciplinary procedures if required.
Great, thank you. Some really, really great advice. And thank you for sharing your experiences with dealing with these cases too across your careers. We will be sure to kind of share some more do's and don'ts to each of you following the webinar. But following on from this, we have had a few questions through. I've kept an eye on them. So yeah, I thought before we kind of close off the session, we'll kind of tackle a few of these together, if that's okay. So first question I've got is for you, Sarah, and it is, can I make a colleague work overtime over the Christmas period where there is a need for more staff?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the short answer on that front is that it's going to depend on what's in your contracts. So if in the contract it states that there's mandatory overtime, that is overtime that's not negotiable, then yes, you can enforce overtime at the festive period and really any other time that you need it. And if your employees refuse, it could be seen as a disciplinary issue. If it's not in the contract, you have no right to enforce overtime. In this case, you might want to consider how you could make the overtime more appealing. Often it's done by increasing the pay, so paying time and a half or perhaps double time, especially if you're asking the team to work on Christmas Day. To be clear, you don't have to increase pay, but it's a nice way to make it a bit more tempting for them. Regardless of whether that overtime is compulsory or voluntary, you should also take into consideration that this is a special time of year for a lot of people, and they will have and be making their own plans with friends and family. So try to be understanding by suggesting people let you know their preferences, for example, and what shifts and what days they want to work or can work, and that you will try to accommodate them wherever possible. Where possible, you want to try and work with your team to avoid any employee relations issues where you might have people who then refuse to work or call in sick, or who in a worst case scenario might end up raising grievances.
Great, thank you, Sarah. That's a really good answer there. The next question I've got is for you, Denise, as well. So what should we do if an employee turns up to work still under the influence of alcohol from a festive party or get-together?
Okay, so it's not appropriate for colleagues to turn up to work either under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or still to be so hungover that it affects their ability to complete the role. Colleagues can do what they want in their personal life, but if it does affect their job, and where it does become an issue, then that's where it's an employment problem. If you do suspect somebody is under the influence, consider why. So, for example, can you smell alcohol on them? Are they slurring their words? Are their eyes glazed? If so, you can approach the colleague to discuss your concerns with them. You're entitled to ask them if they've been drinking or taking drugs before they came into work, as it's against what they should do. Whatever they want to do in their personal life is fine, it's up to them. But if it does affect the work, then it becomes somewhat a business problem. So if you do feel you have reasonable belief that the colleague has come into work under the influence, you can start the conduct proceedings. However, the first thing you probably need to do is make sure that they get home safely. So you can do this by maybe thinking about ordering them a taxi, or if you know somebody that lives near them and they feel comfortable to do so, they can get them home. And then what I'd suggest is you pick up the conduct issues and the process when they're no longer under the influence of alcohol and back in work.
Great, thank you, Denise. Next one's for you as well, actually. So this one is, we have relaxed the dress code, but people are now being a bit too casual, and there've been complaints over joggy Christmas jumpers as well. What should we be doing in this instance?
Okay. Okie doke. So I think a lot of businesses like to do something similar in the festive period. I know we do. And businesses like to do Christmas jumper day, as well as whilst having an office buffet or something similar, just to have a nice Christmas spirit in the office. There's been many stories in the media about the conflicts that come along and up in relation to the Christmas jumpers. So just some that I can think of, the clothing store Next having to pull a jumper referring to the airline Pan Am, as people felt that this was disrespectful to the victims of the Lockerbie bombing of 1988. Another example was Primark being in the papers for telling an employee that it was offensive to wear a Christmas jumper that had Merry Christmas written in the Irish language without any kind of explanation why. Another example I can think of is Debenhams was selling a Christmas jumper with the phrase "a gay in a manger," which people complained was offensive to the Christian faith. So it can be difficult to balance dress codes in allowing people to express themselves and be a bit more informal while still maintaining the standards of the workplace along with the health and safety. Again, it's about setting the rules out at the start, saying clearly what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, reminding colleagues if they're unsure whether the Christmas jumper could be considered as offensive to others. It may be best to keep it for personal events or something that's outside of work if they're not sure how people may react to it.
Great, thank you, Denise. Next one is for you, Sarah. So this is, what do we do if we witness misbehaviour whilst we're at the party?
Okay, yeah, that is a really good question. As I think kind of earlier on, we've covered what to do after the party, but not necessarily how to approach it in the moment. The short version is that you can't stand by while something inappropriate is happening. This wouldn't send the right message to your team and your colleagues, and it would also reflect on you and the respect that your team would have, and you as a manager and as a leader. If you do see inappropriate behaviour, whether that's swearing, harassment, or unacceptable drunken behaviour, you should try and bring it to an end there and then. The approach that you're going to take is going to depend on how serious the situation is. If someone's getting a little rowdy and is maybe coming close to being appropriate, it might be best to take them to one side for a quick reminder of the rules and to ask them to be mindful of their behaviour for the rest of the party. However, if you witness some behaviour that is just wholly unacceptable, such as sexual harassment, offensive comments or actions, the use of illegal drugs, it may be that you need to ask that colleague to leave. If there's another manager present there with you, you might want to make them aware so that you can both tackle the situation, particularly if you're concerned that the colleague is under the influence and may become difficult. You can approach the colleague and confirm what you've seen, and that as this goes against the conduct rules, you're asking them to leave. Bear in mind that you do have a duty of care towards them. So again, try to make sure that they get home safe by calling them a taxi. If that colleague then still refuses to leave, don't put yourself in harm's way, but you should try your best to diffuse the situation and encourage them to leave. If anyone's been upset or offended by that behaviour, link in with them to make sure they are all okay and make sure that they've got any wellbeing support that may be provided in the moment. And then once you're all back in work, you can then start to proceed on any processes such as disciplinary action or grievances that might be submitted.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm really loving the detail in these answers as well. Really handy advice. Still got time for a couple more, so I've just picked out a few more too. This one's for you, Denise. So we have some colleagues under the age of 18 attending the party. What additional points should we be thinking of?
Okay, so that's another really good point. So dependent on your business, it's possible that you will have colleagues who are under the age attending the party. So this is something to consider when you're arranging the party as well. So you could think about, is there an activity everyone would be happy to do, like a breakout room, rather than maybe going out for a meal or somewhere where there's going to be alcohol involved. So if not, and if you're having a party at a restaurant when alcohol is involved and is being served, you need to be really clear about the rules for the colleagues that are under the age. So you need to think about, so they won't be allowed to drink at the party, given it's illegal to drink under the age of 18. You should also let the other colleagues know that they shouldn't buy drinks for those colleagues, as that's also illegal. It can be frustrating, especially if the underage colleague has been allowed by their parents maybe to drink at home before they're 18, but ultimately at the workplace event, we need to make sure that there's no illegal activity taking place. So we'd say, no alcohol for somebody that's under the age of 18, and nobody should be buying that for them. Yeah. Possibly things like that. You can have the big party. You can also do things like wristbands, so it's quite clear if they're going to the bar that they're under 18, they shouldn't be served alcohol, those types of things.
Great, thank you, Denise. I've got one last one as well for you, Sarah, and this one is, where does the responsibility end for the employer? So for example, if employees leave the work party and go into town, is there a cut-off point with the responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is not always. It's not very clear cut. So we will see a lot of businesses that don't perhaps have a set work night out or a set all business Christmas party, and it might be that certain teams say, right, okay, right, we're going to go out and we're going to go out for drinks on Friday night, for example. So sometimes we see these informal arrangements. In short, if individuals are socialising with other colleagues and some inappropriate behaviour happens during that time period, be it some form of physical altercation, forms of sexual harassment within there, and that comes back to you as a business, then you still have a duty of care to the individual who's reported that behaviour and the individual who has been accused of that behaviour to make sure that actually that is resolved, and actually you're looking after both of those individuals in the workplace. So say if we link it back into that positive duty of care for sexual harassment that's now in place from October, if you have a colleague who comes to you and say, right, okay, a group of us in X team went out on Friday night, Y person was involved in some inappropriate comments, you still have a duty of care as an employer to investigate that. So just be really mindful of any concerns that people might bring to you as a line manager.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, those questions have been great, and thank you for answering them too. Hopefully you have found it like a valuable session today, everyone who's here too. But of course, if we weren't able to cover off any of your questions, we will follow up with you personally after the session, and we will also be kind of giving you a bit more information of where you can find further support on some of the topics that we've covered too. So Sarah and Denise, I just want to say thank you so much for your insight and guidance today. It's been a really good session. And a few more things before we actually finish the webinar. So as I said, if you do want any help with anything that we've covered, please feel free to check out any of the topics in the Sage HR Advice portal. Or alternatively, if you're a professional or premium customer, don't hesitate to ring the advice line too. One of the consultants will be happily provide any guidance on any of the topics that we've covered. And just to let you know about a few other options too, so we've got Sage HR Advice. So this is here to help you navigate and simplify these proposed changes that we've talked about in terms of legislation. And alongside this, we've got Sage HR, so you can automate and simplify tasks. You can calculate holiday entitlement, arrange shift scheduling based on people's contracted hours, and automatically log hours worked too. And you can find out more with the link on the slide here. We do also have some amazing new offerings in HR advice too, including things like small business toolkits, a digital e-learn library which does get regularly updated with new content, and some additional services like on-site health and safety assessments. So some fantastic offerings for your business. I would highly recommend getting more information if that does sound like something that you would benefit from. And I will be launching a poll soon as well, which you can respond to if you'd like and request a bit more information. But as for webinars, I did briefly mention this earlier in the session, but we do have another upcoming webinar with Advisor Plus, and that's going to be called Joining the Business Day One Rights, where we'll be joined again by some special guests just to give you some real advice and kind of scenarios on the topic too. And that's going to be on the 15th of January at 2 p.m. We also have our next Sage HR Showcase webinar in the series, which is going to be all about the leave management module. So if you do want to learn a bit more about that and kind of see what it's all about, definitely recommend that you come along to that. As well as some kind of festive payroll themed webinars too. So we'll be talking about some topics and tasks that you may need to do at this time of year. So check out all of those at sage.co.uk/webinars. One last thing from me, you will receive a short survey as you exit the webinar. So if you do have just a moment to fill that out, we would really, really appreciate that. We look at all the scores and read all of the comments and things and just try to make these as good as they can be. So we will kind of take any feedback on board going forward. But yeah, thank you again to everyone joining us today. A special thank you again to Sarah and Denise too for their expertise. Hopefully we'll see you on another webinar very soon, and we do hope that you have a lovely time over the festive season. So from all of us, it is goodbye for now.